Her daughter-in-law smirked and said it again. "You just cook, cry, and complain." Marlene Avery smiled, cleared the dishes, and reviewed the deed transfer over decaf. By morning, the kitchen would be hers in memory only, and theirs in foreclosure. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the market value. The house they mocked her in was already under contract, and when they went to claim it, the keys were in escrow and the oven was cold. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The smell of lemon thyme chicken drifted through the dining room, warm and familiar. Marlene Avery brushed a lock of silver hair from her cheek, then placed the final plate at the head of the table. Whitney's seat. She always plated hers last. A habit from catering days, presentation first, dignity always. Whitney sauntered in, phone in one hand, lip-glossed smirk in place. "Ugh," she muttered, taking in the food. "You just cook, cry, and complain." Third time. Marlene didn't flinch. Grant, her son, didn't look up from his phone. He stabbed a fork into the green beans like a man trying not to pick sides. "Thanks, Mom," he said flatly. "Of course, sweetheart," Marlene replied, her voice syrup smooth. She sat at her corner seat, the one by the window that caught the late Florida sun. It used to be where Harold sat. Before the heart attack, before Whitney, before the house got quiet even when full. Whitney took a bite and gave an exaggerated moan. Bland and bitter, like always. She chuckled into her sparkling water. Marlene smiled at her, a thin, deliberate line of lips. Inside, something snapped, not loud, not violent, just clean, like the gentle click of a sealed Tupperware lid. After dinner, no one helped clear the table. They never did. She didn't ask. She scraped plates in silence, the ceramic clinks echoing too loud in the sink. Her hand trembled only once, when Whitney's lipstick left a pink half-moon on the edge of the water glass. Marlene wiped it with her thumb, pressed a little harder than necessary. The dishwasher hummed to life. She wiped her hands on a checkered towel, walked down the hall past the framed family photos, Grant's graduation, Harold's fishing trip, a blurry Christmas morning from 15 years ago, and stepped into the home office. It still smelled faintly of paper and aftershave. She knelt in front of the bottom drawer and pulled it open with both hands. Neatly labeled folders stared back at her. Birth certificates, tax returns, deed documents. She flipped past them with the ease of someone who'd kept her life alphabetized even while her heart broke. There it was, still unsigned. Backup property transfer deed. Avery residence. It had been drafted right after Harold died, at Lisa's suggestion, just in case. Marlene had never filled in the date. She stared at the line meant for her signature. Her reflection in the glass cabinet door behind the desk looked back. Tired, yes, but still whole, still capable of change. She stood, found her phone on the charger, and scrolled through her contacts until she saw it. Lisa McKay, Keller Williams Realty. The call rang twice before picking up. "Marlene?" Lisa sounded surprised, but not unkind. "You okay?" Marlene's voice was low, steady. "You still help people who want out quietly?" A pause. Then Lisa replied, "Always." Marlene looked toward the kitchen, where faint laughter echoed. Whitney's laugh, sharp and victorious, as if she'd won something tonight. "Good," Marlene said, gripping the phone tighter. "Then I need you to come by. Tomorrow morning, early." Lisa hesitated, just for a beat. "Marlene, are you sure?" Marlene walked back toward the kitchen, eyes scanning the immaculate counters she cleaned daily and the pantry she was no longer allowed to stock. "Let's just say," she whispered, "I'm finally ready to serve something different." She ended the call. The dishwasher beeped, signaling the end of its cycle. She didn't move. Instead, she reached into the drawer once more and pulled out a pen. Morning light filtered in through the blinds, casting thin bars across the kitchen counter like prison slats. Marlene stood in front of the stove in her housecoat, flipping pancakes with quiet precision. She'd made them thinner this time, on purpose. Whitney hated when they came out crispy on the edges. She plated them just the way Whitney liked, almond butter on the side, not spread. a blueberry cluster in the center for presentation, and a drizzle of syrup, not too much, never too much. Whitney waltzed in 20 minutes late, earbuds in, already mid-call. "No, I said I'll approve the vendor by Thursday, but that budget isn't moving." She glanced at the plate, gave a single nod of approval, and walked out without another word. Grant came in next, barely awake. He kissed Marlene's cheek absently, grabbed a fork, and scrolled through his emails while eating. "Thanks, Mom," he mumbled. She smiled, same as always. "Of course, sweetheart." He didn't look up. Marlene moved with quiet grace, clearing empty coffee mugs, folding a dish towel just so. But inside, she was documenting, observing, archiving every small dismissal like ingredients for a slow-simmering stew. That afternoon she sat on the sun porch with an old recipe binder spread across her lap. But instead of recipes, she'd begun filling its sleeves with handwritten notes, each one a different cut. "We're out of oat milk again? Can you even keep track of a grocery list? You know she doesn't like spicy. Why would you use cayenne? If you're not contributing to bills, don't touch the thermostat." Each comment, dated, quiet ink against soft paper. The binder had once held award-winning menus from the peak of her catering days, weddings, galas, the mayor's fundraiser. Now it cataloged something darker, something useful. Later that week, she met Lisa at a small coffee shop tucked behind a gas station, the kind of place no one in her neighborhood would think to look. Lisa looked crisp as ever, in a blue blazer and soft gold earrings. She always did know how to dress for both business and battle. They sat in a back booth with 2 steaming cups between them. Lisa scanned a document, lips tight. "You're still on the deed," she said finally, tapping the page. 50% ownership with full survivorship rights from Harold. It's legal, it's leverage. Marlene nodded. "But I never filed the quitclaim." "Doesn't matter. Unless you signed something else after that, this house is half yours, period." Marlene looked down into her coffee. The steam curled upward like breath from a buried thing. "They don't act like it." Lisa leaned in, voice low. "That's what makes it powerful. They think you're invisible." Marlene gave a soft, hollow laugh. "Invisibility's a good cover." Lisa slid a manila folder across the table. "This is a pre-listing overview. No pressure. But if you decide to move, I've got buyers, quiet ones, who don't ask questions." Marlene didn't touch the folder, not yet. "And if I wanted to keep it quiet a little longer?" "You set the pace," Lisa said gently. "I'm just your air support." They parted with no hug, no visible affection, just a shared nod, like co-conspirators. That evening, Marlene returned home to find the hallway thermostat covered in duct tape. A post-it note stuck on top read, "Do not adjust, Whitney." In the kitchen, the fridge had a new printout, a weekly food tracker labeled Avery Household Budget Control. Only 2 names listed, Whitney and Grant. Marlene's name wasn't there. She stared at it for a long time, then calmly opened a drawer and pulled out a red Sharpie. In small, neat letters, she wrote across the bottom of the sheet, "Control the kitchen all you want. You forgot who built it." She capped the pen, reached for her binder. The laundry door had never locked before. Now it clicked shut behind Whitney every time, always with her AirPods in, always with a laundry basket pressed to her hip like a badge of ownership. Marlene noticed the new padlock on the inside of the cabinet, the bleach stored up high, the detergent labeled, "Private, do not use." So Marlene began re-washing towels at odd hours, not because they were dirty, but because it reminded her she still could. One afternoon, she reached for the thermostat while wiping down the hallway trim, her old habit of doing the quiet chores in slippers. As her hand hovered, Whitney's voice floated from the stairs behind her. "Don't," she said. "It's preset. The electric bill's been insane." Marlene smiled, small and tight. "I was just dusting it." Whitney didn't respond, just kept walking, her gym leggings loud against the hardwood. At dinner, Whitney barely spoke, but when she did, it was to sigh at the steamed carrots. "Again?" she muttered. Grant looked up from his phone long enough to offer, "Mom, you should, I don't know, get out more. Take a class or something. It's not good being cooped up." Marlene wiped the corner of her mouth with a napkin, composed. I'm hardly cooped. I just don't need as much noise as you two. Whitney smiled with teeth. It's called having a life. That night, long after the dishwasher had stopped humming and Marlene had retired to her room, she opened her tablet to check her email. No internet. She frowned. Tapped again. Nothing. Down the hall, Whitney's laugh cut through the quiet like a fork scraping porcelain. She was on the phone again, low, urgent, intimate, and not with Grant. Marlene waited until the house fell still, slipped out of bed. She crept to the living room router box and checked the network label. New password. WhitG-5 secure. She hadn't been told. The next morning, Lisa texted, Can walk by her through this week. Quiet guy. Doesn't blink at family drama. You say when. Marlene stared at the message while stirring oatmeal. Whitney walked in, dropped her purse loudly on the table, and sighed. I told you I'm dairy-free. Is that milk? It's almond. Marlene lied, sweetly. 2 days later, while Grant and Whitney were both at work, according to the synced calendar Whitney had pinned on the fridge, Marlene set the table with cream linens and polished silver, not the special occasion set, the almost special one. She wore a pale blue blouse and her late husband's watch. Lisa arrived with the buyer, mid-40s, shaved head, calm demeanor, steel gray car. His eyes were warm but clinical. He asked questions Marlene was ready for. Square footage, roof age, a C unit. When he complimented the open kitchen layout, Marlene offered him a slice of lemon pound cake. No one rushed. No one raised a voice. They sat at the table for exactly 14 minutes. Marlene kept it light. This home's fed dozens over the years, she said. Even a few politicians. Can't promise the politics were clean, but the plates always were. The buyer smiled, jotting something in his phone. By the time they left, the scent of lemon and sugar still lingered, clinging like a memory to the air. That night, Whitney came home, sniffing the air sharply. Did you bake today? Marlene didn't look up from her magazine. I was in the mood. Whitney glanced out the window, then at the hallway. I saw a gray SUV in the driveway on the ring cam. Probably Amazon, Marlene said, flipping the page. By the following Monday, Marlene was back to cooking pot roast. The same one Whitney said smelled like church basements and second chances. Marlene added extra rosemary this time. Not because Whitney liked it, because she didn't. She hummed while peeling carrots, deliberate in her slowness, as if she had all the time in the world. Whitney came into the kitchen mid-call, laughing with someone named Brooke. No, she still cooks every night. It's like living with a very polite ghost. She glanced over at Marlene, didn't lower her voice. Her casseroles are basically edible nostalgia. It's cute. Marlene stirred quietly, the wooden spoon scraping bottom. I heard that. Whitney raised a brow. Oh? Then back into the phone. See what I mean? Passive-aggressive and slow-roasted. Marlene smiled gently. Dinner will be ready in 30. She served it like she always had. Center-cut, symmetrical portions. She even poured Whitney a glass of red wine from a bottle she'd hidden at the back of the pantry. Vintage enough to impress, cheap enough not to matter. Whitney barely touched it. So heavy, she muttered, nudging the roast around her plate. You know this isn't the 70s, right? Marlene tilted her head. The 70s had better manners. Grant said nothing, as usual. After dinner, while the house quieted and laundry hummed behind the locked door, Marlene moved through the upstairs hallway barefoot. Her movements were fluid, almost invisible. Decades of tiptoeing past sleeping babies and cranky grooms had trained her for this. In her closet, she reached for the back corner, beneath the winter coats no one wore in Florida, and pulled out a box labeled Donate Old Books. Inside, wrapped in a dish towel, were her mother's pearl earrings, Harold's cufflinks, and the deed file Lisa had reviewed weeks ago. She added one more item, the original catering contract for the mayor's fundraiser. Signed by hand, her name first, Marlene Avery. Events, not a footnote, a headline. The next morning, she opened her email while stirring steel-cut oats. A message from Lisa blinked at the top of her inbox. Subject: Buyer offer finalized. Cash, clean, contingency-free. She exhaled once, long and quiet, then tapped reply. Set the window. I'm ready. By lunch, Lisa had emailed the pre-sale commitment and a draft of the no-disclosure clause. The buyer had agreed. No names, no leaks, no mistakes. That evening, Marlene wore lipstick. Not for anyone else, for herself. She signed the documents at the kitchen table while Whitney watched a reality show in the other room, volume too high, the laugh track blaring like a warning bell no one could interpret. The pen moved smoothly, not a tremble in her hand. She tucked the signed folder into a baking dish, covered it with foil, and slid it into the back of the cabinet behind the bundt pans. Safe. At 9:23 p.m., Lisa called. I'm dropping something off tomorrow. You'll want to see it before I file. Marlene sensed it in Lisa's tone, a new undercurrent. Not business, not small talk. The next morning, Lisa appeared with a yellow envelope and a pale face. I ran a light pull on recent property tax filings, she said, standing just inside the door, not yet sitting, to make sure there were no ownership conflicts before we submit anything official. And? Marlene asked, dreading nothing. Lisa handed her the envelope. Your name's been used, on joint filings, twice, last year and this year. Marlene blinked. What kind of filings? Federal, as a dependent, under Grant and Whitney's returns. Marlene went cold. Lisa added softly, That's fraud, Marlene. Tax fraud. If they filed those without consent, that's jail time. Marlene opened the envelope. There it was, her social security number, her address. The box checked joint household support. Lisa watched her. You want to involve an attorney? Marlene didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the return address from the IRS. Give me till Sunday, she said finally. I'll let you know what I want to do. On Friday morning, Marlene carried 2 manila folders to her car tucked under a tea towel, like warm biscuits fresh from the oven. Inside, Harold's original will, the power of attorney Lisa had notarized in 2014, and every insurance form she'd ever signed with her maiden name. She drove with the windows down, her face unreadable, the Florida breeze brushing against skin that had grown used to swallowing heat. The storage unit was 10 minutes from the house, a gray corrugated row of aluminum doors in a forgotten corner off Mayport Road. The manager gave her a code and asked no questions. She placed the folders in a fireproof box, closed the lid, and ran a palm over its top like she used to smooth a cake before the final glaze. Back home, she found a note from Whitney taped to the fridge. Running errands. Don't forget the quinoa at Fresh Market. W. Marlene stared at it a moment, then opened the freezer, pulled out the half-eaten lemon pound cake, and tossed it in the trash without a word. By noon, Lisa had looped in a lawyer, Maggie Castillo. Marlene met her on a video call with her reading glasses perched low and a pad of paper in her lap. Maggie, to her surprise, wasn't stern or judgmental, just surgical. We'll need a fraud timeline, Maggie said, as detailed as you can recall. Dates, documents, access points. Start small and build. Marlene nodded, already reaching for her binder. That night she stayed up late compiling the file. March 14th, guest Wi-Fi restricted April 2nd. Thermostat sealed with duct tape April 22nd. Binder removed from pantry. Found torn May 3rd. Tax filings arrive in yellow envelope from Lisa. By the time she was done, it read more like a procedural than a diary. She sent the file at 2:13 a.m. with the subject line, Timeline, Household Actions, Marlene Avery. The next morning, she made pancakes again, extra crispy on the edges. Whitney came down in sunglasses, nursing a green smoothie. I swear you're trying to sabotage my metabolism. Marlene smiled over her shoulder. Old habits. Later that afternoon, Marlene sat at the kitchen counter with a laptop open to a spreadsheet labeled Avery Monthly, Utilities and Grocery Cost Breakdown. She sighed just loud enough. Whitney, passing through in yoga pants and a Bluetooth earpiece, paused. What is that? Marlene gave a practiced frown. Just trying to track where I can help out. I thought maybe if I understood how things are divided, I could pitch in. But I can't figure out this Excel program. Whitney took the bait. Let me see. she said, sliding the laptop toward herself. "Oh my God, this is so analog." She laughed. "Are you seriously tracking margarine by ounces?" Marlene leaned in, eyes wide. "I just thought maybe if I could show you where I use the least—" Whitney rolled her eyes. "No offense, but this is what happens when people don't evolve. You're like budgeting for casseroles." She clicked around the file, oblivious to the fact that it wasn't linked to anything real, just formulas and highlighted cells meant to occupy, not inform. A distraction, exactly as planned. After Whitney left the room, Marlene deleted the fake spreadsheet and cleared the browser history. Then she reopened the secure portal Lisa had sent earlier that week, confirming the upcoming appraisal scheduled under a new name, Avery Family Living Trust, Executor Marlene H. Avery. Simple, quiet, bulletproof. It started with breakfast. One morning, the kitchen was quiet at 7:15, then again at 8. By 8:30, Whitney stomped in, pulled open the fridge, and stood glaring into it like it had personally offended her. "Where's the yogurt parfaits?" she asked the heir. Marlene looked up from the dining room table where she was clipping coupons from an old newspaper. "Didn't get around to it." Whitney blinked. "Since when?" "Since today." She didn't elaborate. Over the next week, small routines began to dissolve. The kettle didn't whistle on schedule. No banana bread appeared on Thursdays. Dinner became a 2 or 3 night affair, leftovers stretched intentionally, as if time itself were under budget review. Whitney's mood soured with each missing bite. "I guess cooking isn't her full-time job anymore," she muttered to Grant one evening while microwaving soup. Grant didn't respond immediately, just kept staring at his phone until she jabbed his arm with the spoon. "Seriously, babe, it's weird, right?" Grant looked up. "Maybe she's tired. She's home all day." Marlene cleared her throat softly from behind them, towel in hand. "I could just stop altogether if that's easier." Whitney spun around. No, we're not trying to. I mean, of course we appreciate you, it's just, you used to be so into it." Marlene smiled thinly. "Tastes change." Later that night, Marlene noticed a pile of real estate brochures on the kitchen counter. All of them featured sunny bonus room ideas and contemporary dual office conversions. She flipped through one while sipping her chamomile. In the morning, Grant approached her near the garage door, holding a mug he hadn't washed. "Mom," he said gently, "we've been thinking. Maybe it's time to rework the space upstairs. Like, give you something cozier, downsized. We could use your room as a shared office/guest space. It makes more sense." Marlene blinked once, then nodded. "That's reasonable." His relief was audible. "We'd help you get settled. Put a little desk in the sunroom." She placed a hand lightly on his. "Let me think it through. I don't want to be in the way." "Of course you're not," he said too quickly. She smiled at him. The same smile she gave guests at funerals when they insisted it was a beautiful service. That afternoon, she sat at her laptop and opened the utility accounts, electric, gas, water, 3 clicks each, followed by confirmations, canceled, removed, final notice generated. Then she moved on to her bank's joint account screen, her name beside Grant's. She stared at it a long time before quietly initiating the detachment request. By evening, she had transferred her remaining personal funds to an individual checking account under a new address, her soon-to-be apartments. She packed 1 cardboard box before bed, photo albums, Harold's signed baseball cap, a pair of ballet slippers she hadn't worn since 1983. The tape she sealed it with was quieter than it should have been. At 10:52 a.m. the next day, Lisa called. "Funding's verified. Buyer is ready to move on your schedule. All clean. Title's already been reviewed. No snags." Marlene exhaled. "Then, let's give them the go-ahead." Lisa paused. "You're sure?" Marlene looked out the living room window. Whitney was unloading a trunk full of throw pillows, talking on speakerphone about upgrading the downstairs aesthetic. Grant was nowhere in sight. "I've never been more sure of anything," Marlene said. "Let's set closing for 2 weeks." The house had never been quieter than on the day of its first showing, a Tuesday, mid-morning. Whitney and Grant were both out. He at work, she at a wellness leadership seminar that, according to the email chain Marlene skimmed, involved crystal water bottles and team-building yoga. Perfect. Marlene moved through the house like she used to before the voices and devices took over, deliberate, undisturbed. She set the dining table with soft white linens, freshly ironed. Pale green napkins folded into soft triangles. A flick of eucalyptus oil into the diffuser. The house began to smell like memory, not control. She slid a tray of chocolate chip cookies into the oven, real ones, none of that almond flour substitute mess. The kind Harold always said made the whole house feel like a hug. By 10:02 a.m., the buyer arrived. Same man, same quiet car. Lisa followed behind, clipboard in hand and a black folder tucked under one arm. She gave Marlene a subtle nod. "Place looks incredible," the buyer said, walking through the archway. "Still smells like the last time?" Marlene smiled gently. This house always did aim to make a good first and last impression. She let them roam. The buyer opened closets, tested faucet pressure, measured wall space with an app on his phone. Marlene stood at the counter like any retired hostess might, humming faintly, wiping down a spotless surface that needed no wiping. When they left, she boxed up the cookies, untouched except for one, and wrapped them in parchment. Then, with the oven off and silence fully restored, she climbed the pull-down attic stairs for the first time in 6 years. Up there, the heat pressed in like an accusation. Dust floated in lazy spirals through beams of light slicing in from the vent slats. She moved from box to box, removing anything soft with memory. Grant's baby blanket, Harold's bowling shirt, a water-stained scrapbook labeled Summer '98 in cracked marker. She didn't cry. She didn't pause. She made 2 piles, donate and shred. By sunset, the attic was hollowed out. She ran her hand along the now bare rafters like she was closing the lid on a time capsule. Downstairs, she sipped lemon water while the world spun obliviously. At 6:14 p.m., Whitney burst through the door, designer gym bag swinging, hair pulled tight into a power bun. "Were you expecting someone today?" she asked sharply, not even saying hello. Marlene looked up from her crossword. "Number Y?" There was a car in the driveway this morning, dark gray SUV, and a woman with it. Looked like a clipboard or something? Marlene blinked once. "Oh, that. I ordered cooking. Spices from a new distributor. They sent a representative to drop samples. Some sort of fresh local initiative." Whitney tilted her head. "Since when do you need a rep for cinnamon?" Marlene smiled. "They offered to come. I said yes." Whitney stared at her for a long beat, then scoffed. "Whatever. You're weird lately." "Just older," Marlene replied, turning the page. Whitney muttered something and disappeared upstairs. Marlene sat quietly, the tension in her chest unwinding thread by thread. She stared down at 23A in her crossword, 6-letter word for departure. She filled it in slowly, excited. Her phone buzzed. "Lisa," one new message. "Just got word. Title cleared. Cash buyer filed full funds with escrow. We can legally close in 12 days. Marlene reread the message 3 times. Not 14. 12. The apartment wasn't large, but it was hers. Tucked just north of the Arlington Expressway, it sat at the edge of a quiet block lined with old pecan trees and walk-up brick buildings with deep balconies and sun-bleached railings. Her new unit was on the top floor, 1 bedroom, already furnished in soft, sensible tones. Nothing flashy, just clean lines, sunlight that reached the floors by mid-morning, and a kitchen with enough room for 1 woman and a recipe. Marlene stood by the window during her tour, watching the light fall across the stove burners like a quiet blessing. She could already imagine boiling pasta there. Not for anyone else, just for herself. She signed the lease that afternoon. Back at the house, she didn't mention it. She moved through the familiar spaces the same way she always had, washing mugs no one asked her to, tidying surfaces already clean. But now, each room felt a little less like hers, and a little more like a stage she'd almost finished performing on. That evening, she sat at the dining table with a fresh legal pad, divided it into 3 sections with a ruler, and wrote at the top of each one in steady cursive, "Move, file, serve." She started with the move list. Update change of address with the USPS, reroute her prescriptions to the Walgreens near her new building, pack her jewelry discreetly. File included Maggie's legal documents, the fraud packet, and the trust paperwork she'd carefully compiled for Lisa. Serve was its own beast. She hadn't filled it out yet, but the title of the section said enough. The next day, Whitney breezed into the kitchen while juggling her phone and a half-open container of hummus. She barely looked up before announcing, "I'm thinking of doing a small brunch this weekend, just a few people, kind of a cheers to stability thing." Marlene turned from the sink, drying her hands with a cloth. "For what occasion?" Whitney beamed. "Well, the refinance came through and our new insurance rate finally kicked in. It's like, I don't know, I just feel like this house is finally ours." She didn't say it cruelly, but she didn't say it kindly either. Marlene smiled, a practiced tilt of the lips. "Do you need help prepping?" Whitney blinked like she hadn't expected that question. "Sure, if you don't mind." "I never do." On Saturday, the house filled with Whitney's usual blend of clashing voices, women who wore platform sneakers to the farmer's market and spoke in exaggerated excitement about acai bowls and teal bathroom tile. Marlene moved among them like air, replenishing drinks, clearing plates, her apron freshly starched. "She still does everything herself," one of the guests said, watching Marlene refill a carafe of mimosa. "You're so lucky, Whitney." Whitney laughed, waving it off. "Honestly, she's always been that way. I just stay out of her way. It's kind of her lane." Marlene didn't respond. She was already halfway back to the kitchen where she carefully rewrapped the lemon scones that no one had complimented. Not that she needed them to. By 6, the guests were gone. The kitchen was quiet again, its surface polished and still. The dining room was reset, but the air still held the perfume of vanilla, champagne, and smugness. Whitney stood at the edge of the living room, barefoot, wineglass in hand, looking out the window like it belonged to her future. "This," she said softly, almost to herself, "feels like the house I always wanted." Marlene was wiping down the counter when she heard it. She didn't turn around. She only nodded once, to no one in particular, and then walked calmly to the far side of the kitchen. She opened the lower cabinet beneath the spice rack and pulled out a ream of clean paper. From the drawer above, she retrieved the folder Lisa had labeled "Final Offer," signed. She loaded the printer. She watched each page emerge with the patience of a woman who had waited years to be taken seriously in her own home. When the printing finished, she laid the crisp stack inside a manila envelope. She sealed it with 2 lines of clear tape, then reached into the back of the cabinet, behind an old ceramic baking dish, and slid the envelope into its base like a final layer of truth. On the front of the envelope she wrote, "To be served warm." Sunday morning arrived like any other in the Avery household, soft light through kitchen curtains, the scent of coffee lingering in the air, and the low hum of quiet tension that had become its own kind of furniture. Marlene stood at the stove in her robe, slowly stirring a pot of oatmeal with cinnamon and a touch of brown sugar. The table was already set, modest but thoughtful. White ceramic bowls, orange slices in a glass dish, cloth napkins folded without flourish. She placed a small vase with a single marigold at the center. The flower had bloomed overnight in the backyard garden, just in time. Whitney came downstairs first, barefoot, scrolling through her phone with one hand and adjusting her oversized sweater with the other. "Smells earthy," she muttered, dropping into her chair. Grant followed, rubbing his eyes and yawning into his fist. He moved slower on weekends, always just out of sync with whatever room he entered. Marlene placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of each of them, then poured the last of the coffee into a thermos for herself. She sat down with her own bowl but didn't eat. For a few moments, there was silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons and the tap-tap of Whitney's nails against her phone screen. Marlene waited until Grant had taken his 3rd bite and Whitney had sipped once from her glass of lemon water. Then she stood, walked calmly to the lower cabinet. She reached past the old baking dish and retrieved the manila envelope she had prepared the night before. Her fingers didn't tremble, and her breath remained steady, the way it had for years while plating wedding cakes with cracked icing and holding her smile through backhanded compliments from bridesmaids. She walked over to Whitney's side of the table and placed the envelope gently next to her plate. The post-it note was still in place, written in her clearest script, "To be served warm." Whitney looked up, puzzled. "What's this?" "Just something I cooked up," Marlene said, her voice as calm as a still lake. Whitney peeled off the note, opened the flap, and pulled out the thick stack of papers. Her eyes moved across the first page. Purchase agreement, legal transfer of ownership, Avery residence, before she reached the line that made her fingers freeze. Seller, Marlene H. Avery. Buyer, confidential escrow, Lisa McKay, representative title transfer. Effective, finalized. The next breath she took sounded like it got stuck in her throat. "What the hell is this?" Grant looked over from his bowl, confused. "What are you talking about?" Whitney flipped through the packet, faster now, her voice rising with each turn of a page. "This is fake. This is a mistake. There's no way. You wouldn't—" Grant stood now too, stepping closer. "Mom?" Marlene rose from her seat, her oatmeal untouched, her napkin folded neatly beside her plate. "I hope," she said, her voice warm and unhurried, "you enjoy packing more than you enjoy leftovers." Whitney's mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Her face flushed, eyes darting from the paper to Marlene, then to Grant, looking for a lifeline. "Is this some kind of joke?" Whitney hissed. "You're senile. This can't be legal." Marlene turned to her son, the boy she had once taught to hold a spoon, and now stood watching her like a stranger at a crime scene. "You let her do worse," she said softly. "You just called it peace." Grant didn't speak. He stared at the documents in Whitney's hand like they were written in a language he no longer understood. Whitney slammed the folder down on the table, papers spilling like dropped confetti. "This is insane! You think you can just sell the house out from under us? Who do you think you are?" Marlene didn't flinch. She picked up her thermos and her purse from the side chair. She walked to the doorway and paused just long enough to glance over her shoulder. "I think I'm the one who signed the deed," she said, then stepped out the front door before either of them could form a sentence that might matter. The front door had barely finished closing when Whitney exploded. Marlene heard it even as she crossed the front walkway, her daughter-in-law's voice rising behind the walls like steam from a kettle left on the burner too long. Glass clinked. A chair scraped sharply across the wood floor. Grant's voice followed, quieter, unsure, trying to keep pace with the chaos she had just left behind. Marlene didn't look back. She unlocked her car with a quiet beep, slid into the driver's seat, and placed her thermos gently in the cup holder. As she pulled away from the curb, the sun broke fully through the clouds, casting light across the dashboard. She turned right onto the main road without hesitation, her movements measured, her gaze steady. The streets of Jacksonville looked the same as always, but for the first time in years, she felt like they were leading somewhere new. Back at the house, Whitney stood in the dining room, still clutching the purchase agreement in one hand and shaking with fury. The papers had fanned out across the floor, crinkled and stained now from the lemon water she'd knocked over when she slapped the table. Her breath came in short bursts. "She's bluffing," Whitney snapped. "There's no way she could have done this, not without telling anyone. Not legally." Grant didn't answer right away. He was staring down at the documents as if they might rearrange themselves into a better version of the truth. His eyes moved over each line. Buyer, title, date, looking for the one word that might undo all of it. Whitney grabbed her phone off the counter. "I'm calling a lawyer. This isn't over. She doesn't get to take this house. She doesn't get to win." She had already dialed 3 digits when Grant finally spoke. "Lisa's a licensed broker," he said quietly. "She wouldn't have filed anything that wasn't airtight." Whitney froze. "You're siding with her?" "I'm not siding with anyone," Grant said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "I'm just saying, if it's done, it's done." Whitney let out a sharp, bitter laugh and flung the phone onto the couch. It bounced once and landed between 2 cushions. "She's always manipulated you," she spat. "She just does it with casseroles and guilt." Grant rubbed the back of his neck. His face was pale and his eyes were unfocused. "She asked for respect, and you gave her orders. I gave her structure. You're welcome." That was when Whitney reached for the vase. It was an impulsive movement, thoughtless, fueled by the sick heat of helplessness. She hurled the marigold arrangement across the room where it shattered against the wall just beneath the painting of the St. Augustine lighthouse. The water left a spreading bloom on the beige drywall. Grant didn't yell, didn't curse. He just stared at the shards on the floor for a moment, then turned, grabbed his keys off the hook, and walked out the door without another word. Whitney didn't follow him. She stood in the silence he left behind, breath catching in her throat like too much salt in a shallow dish. Meanwhile, across town, Marlene unlocked the door to her new apartment with a silver key that hadn't touched anyone else's hand but hers. The place was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of a wall clock above the kitchen. She set her purse on the entry table, placed her thermos in the sink, and walked barefoot onto the balcony. The sun had dipped low enough to kiss the edge of the neighboring building, casting long, slanted shadows across the potted succulents left by the previous tenant. She went back inside and lit a candle, lavender and vetiver. The flame flickered once before catching, soft and steady. Then she uncorked a bottle of Merlot, poured a generous glass, and sat down in the yellow armchair by the window. No one asked what she was doing. No one told her what time dinner needed to be ready. No one watched her from across the room, measuring her value in convenience and compliance. She took a slow sip and closed her eyes. The front door creaked when she opened it, just like it always had, hinges slightly off-center from the time Harold bumped it with a couch leg back in 2004. No one had ever bothered to fix it. Marlene stepped into the entryway and paused, listening. Silence. Not the kind that followed arguments or swallowed tension, but the truer kind, the quiet of vacancy. Even the air felt hollow. There were no shoes at the door, no gym bags slouched under the coat hooks. The floral runner Whitney had bought last spring was gone, as were the framed prints she once insisted made the foyer feel curated. Marlene walked slowly, her flats barely making a sound against the hardwood floors. A few echoes followed her from room to room, bouncing softly off bare walls and empty corners. The living room looked larger now. The furniture had been picked up by the donation crew that morning, everything but a single high-backed chair she'd marked with a yellow sticky note, "Keep." Lisa would have it delivered to the new apartment later in the week. She lingered at the arch between the kitchen and dining room, fingers brushing against the molding that had once been painted baby blue. Grant had scratched his initials into it as a boy, and though Whitney had painted over them, Marlene could still feel the grooves under her fingertips. The kitchen was stripped of its character now. No scent of spices, no cluttered counters or clattering dishes, just smooth surfaces, a silent refrigerator, and blank space where the recipe board used to hang. On the butcher block counter sat the only thing Marlene had brought with her today, her apron. Neatly folded, pale green with a faded sunflower stitched on the corner, the same apron she had worn the first time she made Grant's favorite chicken and dumplings, the one she'd been folding and tying for so long it had become second skin. She laid it down in the center of the counter and smoothed it with the flat of her hand. That would be the last thing she left behind. Upstairs, she walked through the bedrooms like an inspector, opening closets, pulling blinds, testing drawers. Everything had been emptied, cleaned, reset. In the room that used to be hers, the faint scent of lavender still clung to the air. She let herself sit on the edge of the bare mattress for a moment, breathing it in. Then she stood. She didn't linger. When she returned downstairs, Lisa was already waiting by the front door, clipboard in hand, her smile soft but professional. "You ready?" Lisa asked. Marlene nodded once. "It's done." She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the keys, house, garage, mail, and placed them one by one into Lisa's open palm. Lisa closed her fingers around them gently, as if accepting something sacred. "Place looks good," she said. "New owners are thrilled." Marlene gave a small smile. "I hope they cook in it." They stepped out onto the porch together. The sky above was clean and high, the kind of blue that made you believe in new beginnings. Marlene didn't look back when Lisa locked the door. She didn't need to. They stood there a moment longer, just two women in good shoes on an old porch that had seen better and worse. Marlene reached into her purse to grab her phone, scrolling through missed calls and unopened texts. She was about to slide it away again when a new email notification popped up. Subject: Thank you. From Marigold House Shelter. She tapped it open. Dear Ms. Avery, we recently received an anonymous contribution in the exact amount needed to complete the renovation of our kitchen space, something our community has waited over a decade to fund. We were told you might not want public acknowledgement, but we wanted you to know. The heart of our home is now open, thanks to you. Our new kitchen opens next month. You are welcome anytime. With gratitude, staff and residents, Marigold House Marlene stared at the screen for a long time, then her lips parted, and she exhaled a small, astonished breath. The kind that came not from surprise, but from the realization that something she once thought lost had quietly returned. It wasn't about taking the kitchen back, it was about building one where it could matter again. The apartment had taken to her slowly, like an unfamiliar recipe that revealed its flavor with time. At first it was too still, too symmetrical, with its neat rental furniture and blank walls. But by the end of the second week, Marlene had tucked basil and rosemary into ceramic pots along the windowsill, hung 3 copper pans above the stove, and lined one shelf with her oldest cookbooks, dog-eared, flour-dusted, and full of the kind of margin notes that only ever made sense to her. She bought a lemon tree sapling from a Sunday market and placed it near the balcony door. It hadn't bloomed yet, but the leaves felt firm in her hands, like something quietly preparing to grow. She didn't miss the noise, not the upstairs footsteps, not the thermostat wars, not the passive sighs that floated behind compliments. What she did notice, more than anything, was the sound of her own breath as she moved, uninterrupted, unmeasured. The rustle of a page, the gentle exhale when she sat with tea, the sound of oil sizzling on the pan without someone calling it too much. On Thursday mornings, she took a tote bag of ingredients to the red brick church on Edgewood, where the kitchen smelled faintly of old hymnals and fresh ginger. She had offered to teach a free class, simple meals for real families. Nothing gourmet, just clean food, warm hands, and stories in between. The first class filled before the flyer had even finished printing. She wore her old apron again, not the green sunflower one which she had left behind, but a new one, cream with blue stitching. Blank, unwritten. She liked that. She moved through the church kitchen the way she always had in spaces she loved, 1 step ahead of the simmer, 2 steps behind her own thoughts, which came back now in waves she hadn't realized she'd missed. One Saturday afternoon, she received an email from a local community council inviting her to serve as a judge for the upcoming neighborhood cook-off. They referenced her culinary legacy and said her name had been strongly recommended by more than one source. She smiled, reading it. Not a smug smile. A quiet, tilted one, the kind you give yourself when the universe finally pronounces your name correctly. She hadn't heard from Grant. Not once. There were moments when she expected it, a message, a knock, even a half-hearted attempt at repair, but nothing came, and strangely, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like clarity. The space he once occupied in her heart hadn't closed. It had been restructured, like a room turned into something more useful. One afternoon, Lisa came over with cinnamon scones and a bottle of Spanish wine. She sat on the balcony while Marlene rearranged a row of succulents that had grown lopsided from leaning too far toward the light. "You've made this place a little sanctuary," Lisa said, looking around. "It wasn't the place," Marlene replied. "It was the quiet." Lisa poured the wine into mismatched mugs. Marlene hadn't bothered buying proper glasses yet, and raised hers. "To fresh starts." Marlene raised hers back. "And to no more apologies." They clinked gently, the ceramic tapping soft and final. As the sun drifted lower in the sky, a breeze moved through the balcony screen, rustling the lemon tree leaves. Marlene leaned back in her chair, her fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic, her bones tired in the best way, earned tired, not drained. She looked out across the view. The rooftops below were uneven, but they carried no weight for her now. She had built something again, not of walls or deeds, but of choice. The envelope came in the afternoon mail, tucked between a utility bill and a catalog she hadn't subscribed to. It had no return address, only her name printed neatly across the center in Grant's careful handwriting. the same script she had taught him when he was 7, and determined to turn every G into a balloon. She carried it inside and set it on the kitchen counter, beside her blooming basil plant and the mug of cooling tea. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she moved through the rest of the afternoon like the envelope didn't exist. She folded laundry, prepped a marinade for tomorrow's class, and wiped the bathroom mirror clean even though it hadn't needed it. But by sunset, she knew she wouldn't sleep until she read it. Marlene sat at the dining table, the window open behind her, a soft breeze brushing against the back of her neck. She opened the envelope with a letter opener Harold had once given her as a stocking stuffer, silver-plated, useless for much else. The flap came apart cleanly. The letter inside was written on lined paper in blue ink. 5 paragraphs. No greeting, no closing signature. Just the wound, laid bare. He wrote that she had embarrassed him, that she had blindsided the family and created permanent damage, that Whitney hadn't been perfect, but she tried, and what Marlene had done was vindictive, cold, and unnecessary. He said the house had always been theirs, not just hers, and that no mother should ever put paperwork over blood. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't mention the shelter donation or the classes. He didn't say he missed her. Marlene read it once, slowly, every word, no skimming. Then she folded it back along its creases, set it beside her tea, and stared at the window as the sun slid behind the trees. She didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain had already passed through her months ago. This was just the sediment at the bottom of the pot, bitter, flat, and no longer needed. She opened a fresh notebook from the kitchen drawer, turned to the first blank page, and began to write. It wasn't an angry letter. It was quiet, honest, measured. She told him how long she had waited, how many times she had swallowed silence to keep his peace intact. She wrote about the cold dinners, the stolen identity, the invisible erasures, and the way he had stood still while she disappeared. She wrote that she had loved him more fiercely than he would ever know, but that love without respect was no longer something she was willing to carry. When she finished, she signed her name. Then she tore the page neatly from the notebook, folded it once, and held it in her hand. For a brief moment she considered mailing it, but then she looked at the note Grant had sent. The blue ink, the absence of a question, the way it dripped with blame rather than grief. She stood, walked to the kitchen trash bin, and held both letters above the rim. Then, without ceremony, she tore them in half. Once, then again. The paper fell like confetti into the bin, pieces of a conversation that no longer needed a response. Later that evening, she opened her laptop and visited the Marigold House Shelter's donation page. She read through the latest update, a photo of the new kitchen, walls painted yellow, counters gleaming, a banner in the background that read, "Here, you are never in the way." Marlene entered a new amount, larger than before. When prompted for a dedication, she typed, "In honor of women who don't wait to be invited." She clicked submit. Then she closed the laptop, stood, and turned off the kitchen light. It began with a recipe card. Marlene had been organizing her church class materials, slipping extra handouts into folders, rewriting ingredient lists in bigger print for the older volunteers, when a worn index card fell from between the pages of her planner. Faded red ink, smudged corner, her mother's handwriting, chicken pot pie. The real kind, not the shortcut one. She smiled at it, smoothing the edges as if it were delicate china. Then she pulled a blank notebook from her bag and copied the recipe inside, word for word. But this time, she didn't just write the steps. She added a memory. Serve this on a cold day when someone's quiet for too long. The next day, she brought the notebook to Marigold House. She'd begun helping there once a week after her donation, not with money anymore, but with time, sorting pantry items, organizing menus, occasionally teaching a class when the kitchen coordinator called in sick. During a quiet moment after lunch service, she showed the notebook to Camilla, one of the long-term shelter volunteers with a permanent pen tucked behind her ear. Camilla read the page, then looked up. "You know what this is, right? It's a cookbook." Marlene laughed, brushing flour from her palms. "It's more like a running monologue, with measurements," but Camilla wasn't smiling. It's a story, maybe lots of stories. That night, Marlene sat on her balcony with a mug of herbal tea, flipping through her recipes. One by one, she began rewriting them, not just the ingredients, but the moments, the feelings that came before the flavor. Sweet onion tart, to remind yourself you can be bold without apology. Cornbread muffins, for feeding kids who don't look up when they eat anymore. Coffee chili brisket, for when forgiveness tastes better than silence. She brought the project to the shelter kitchen on a Wednesday. By Friday, the women had added pages of their own. One shared a gumbo recipe she learned while hiding in a friend's trailer in Mobile. Another contributed a list of dry ingredients she could stretch across 5 dinners with just one hot plate. Marlene bought a ring-bound scrapbook from a craft store and began typing the entries each evening, printing them on warm cream pages. She hand-punched every hole, threaded every section. It became its own ritual, just like cooking had always been. She called the project Cook, Cry, Conquer. The title came to her one night while stirring lentils for her Thursday class. She'd nearly discarded it at first, thinking it too obvious, too on the nose. But then she realized that was exactly the point. 1 page for every step of her freedom. 1 recipe for every time she swallowed a comment, or a sacrifice, or herself. 1 dish for every time she remembered what it meant to feed someone, and what it meant when no one fed you back. Lisa visited again not long after the first draft had been bound. Marlene had laid out a spread of thumbprint cookies and pear preserves, both from the new manuscript. Lisa flipped through the pages, pausing now and then to run her finger along the margin notes. "This isn't just a cookbook," she said. "It's a blueprint." Marlene smiled. "It's also a warning." Lisa didn't laugh. She just set her wine glass down carefully and pulled a folded slip of paper from her bag. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure," she said, sliding it across the table. "But I showed it to a friend at Graybell Press. She called it Quiet Fire." Marlene opened the note, scanned the brief message, and then read it again. They wanted to publish it, not just distribute it at shelters or hand it out at classes. A full run, real covers, real shelves. She didn't speak. She didn't trust her voice. Instead, she reached for the edge of the table and steadied herself. Her chest rose, her shoulders dropped, and her eyes filled, not with disbelief, but with something rounder, deeper, older than relief. She wept. Not the way she used to, in silence over dirty dishes or behind pantry doors. This was a kind of weeping that unknotted things, that rewrote endings. The studio lights weren't as harsh as Marlene had expected. They cast a warm, diffused glow that softened her profile and caught the subtle silver in her hair. She sat in a high-backed chair across from a local news anchor whose cheeks were dusted with highlighter and whose questions had been pre-approved. Still, the space felt less like an interview and more like a meal she had prepared long ago, finally served. The segment was part of a Sunday morning feature called Women Who Change the Table. When Graybell Press sent out the advance copies of Cook, Cry, Conquer, Marlene hadn't anticipated the ripple, how fast the calls came, how easily people said yes when you finally said your own name out loud. "Tell us," the anchor said, leaning forward with polished curiosity, "why this book matters now." Marlene paused. She didn't rush. She had nothing to prove anymore. "It's not about revenge," she said. "It's about reclaiming the room people forgot you built." The anchor smiled, nodded. "And who would you like to thank? Anyone who helped you get here?" Marlene looked into the camera, steady, clear. "I'd like to thank the woman who wrote the first recipe down," she said, "and the one who packed a box at midnight, and the one who said no, finally. They were all me, and they were all enough." That was all she said. No names, no nods to those who'd once overlooked her. She owed no one else a chapter. The segment aired the following Sunday, just after the church service broadcasts and before the evening sports recap. She didn't watch it live. She didn't have cable. But her phone buzzed steadily throughout the afternoon. A neighbor from 2 buildings over stopped her in the lobby. "Are you the cookbook woman?" She nodded, and the woman pressed her hand to her chest. "My daughter's in culinary school. She read your story and said, she sounds like somebody who finally got heard." Marlene thanked her, then stepped into the elevator. The next morning, her mailbox was full. Postcards, folded notes, even a manila envelope with a stack of printed emails forwarded from the publisher. Women from New Mexico, Iowa, Tallahassee, some young, some not, some angry, some soft, all of them writing to say the same thing in different ways. I didn't know I was allowed to leave, until I read that you did. The first print run of the cookbook sold out in 4 days. Graybell ordered a second before the ink dried on the first royalty check. Shelters requested bulk shipments. Independent bookstores made a section called Quiet Fire and put her face on a handwritten shelf card: local author, former caterer, survivor, teacher. Marlene read each letter, one at a time, at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and the soft ticking of the wall clock she had brought with her from the old house. She kept the most personal ones in a wooden box lined with linen napkins. That evening she cooked for herself. Not for a class, not for a launch event, just for her. Roasted chicken thighs, garlic mashed potatoes, and a lemony kale salad she'd once been told was too bold for weeknight meals. She used real butter, set the table with a cloth napkin, lit a single candle. She sat at her small dining table alone, not lonely. Halfway through the meal, she opened a new journal and began drafting a second volume. Not recipes this time, letters, to women like her, to the version of herself who had once stood in her own kitchen and been told she was in the way. She took another bite of her meal, smiled to herself, and whispered, "They wanted to erase me from my own kitchen. Instead, I became a name on everyone's plate."